Hi there, John Moore here, and I am a shamanic teacher and practitioner in the great state of Maine in the United States. And today I'm going to talk to you about shamanism and the shadow. Ooh, sounds scary, doesn't it? The shadow, if you're unfamiliar, you might have heard the term, or you might have even done some shadow work. But basically, is a term coined by Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst who was somewhat contemporary of Freud. He invented, and didn't invent, he came up with the ideas for things like complexes and the collective unconscious and personality types and all kinds of things that we use today that are that came out of his work. And Carl Jung did study the work of shamans and yogis and all kinds of things, and he sort of combined spirituality with medicine and psychology to formulate a lot of his ideas. And his work is still widely studied today because some of it has led to some really effective breakthroughs and things. If you've ever taken a personality test, for example, normally that stuff has come out of ideas that were put forward by Jung at some point and then adapted later by other people. So the shadow is a term that he used to describe the exiled or hidden parts of ourselves. The parts that we don't want to look at, the part that we push into our unconscious. Why would we exile parts of ourselves? Why would we not want to look at parts of ourselves? Well, there are different reasons for that, but the biggest reason for that is that it might be painful for us to look at certain things in our past, abuses, bad bad situations, shame. Shame is a big one. Anything that we feel shameful about, we tend to not want to look at. The shadow also might hold anything about us that has been sort of socialized out of us. So when I grew up in the time and place when I was a child, for a boy to seem emasculine at all was a horrible thing, and you actually potentially invited violence from your peers or even your parents. You were supposed to be a manly man, and whatever that meant, play sports, drink beer, whatever random things they described as manly were. And so it was not manly to cry. It was not manly to want to be nurturing or play with dolls or whatever. And so anything that might have been considered emasculine might be something that somebody like me might have pushed into my shadow when I have a desire to be nurturing. I when my children were little, and even to today, I take really good care of them, and I derive a lot of joy and pleasure and energy from being a caregiver for not just my children, but for other people. And it's part of what makes me a shamanic healer, is that I really enjoy taking care of people. I really enjoy that aspect of it. Now that, traditionally, I guess, has been seen as something more on the feminine side, right? And so maybe some of those tendencies were repressed. So the shadow holds a lot of our desires that we might think of as unacceptable. It holds a lot of our dreams that we might have pushed back. It holds parts of our personality that we have deemed unacceptable. The reason we want to look at these things and pull them up is because these things don't stay hidden forever. And what happens is they act up in unexpected ways, right? One example of that is anytime we become reactive instead of responsive. Somebody does something that triggers us, and all of a sudden we're in this mode where we're not thinking, we're not in our frontal cortex anymore, and we're saying things that we normally wouldn't say, or doing things that we normally wouldn't do, and we become reactive, and that makes situations worse a lot of the time. And so we're not actually in control of ourselves if we haven't looked at and integrated our shadow parts. And Jung said, I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he basically said, you don't become enlightened by staring at the light, you become enlightened by shining a light on the things that are in the darkness, right? So in his mind, in his thinking, this shadow work, this bringing the things out of the unconscious, is some of the most important work that you can do. I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about the shadow work I've done and how that has affected my life in hugely profound ways. So hang on for that. One of the reasons to work on the shadow is to stop being as reactive as we might be and have better control of ourselves. Another reason is that we're unlocking a great deal of spiritual, for lack of a better term, energy, psycho-spiritual energy. Think about how much energy your spirit has to exert to hold down all of this stuff. Now, there's a kind of this unspoken, insidious lie that helps us maintain our shadow, and that if I uncover what's in my shadow, I'm going to turn into a raving psychopath or something along those lines. So this is where it's interesting how folklore, and even popular stories follow spiritual realities very frequently. So this is where Jekyll and Hyde comes in, right? Doctor drinks a potion and it turns him into all of the shadow aspects of himself come out, the darker side. And this is really about, in the era that Jekyll and Hyde was written, was really about looking at this dual nature of people. Your shadow, however, isn't evil. It's not like that. It's not evil in the traditional sense. There may be desires there. So you may have the one I use a lot is somebody cuts me off in traffic and I have the desire to punch them in the nose. Well, that's reactivity, right? And looking at what's causing that desire to punch that person in the nose for cutting me off in traffic, that's what's in the shadow, right? That whatever it is that's pushing up that desire, the want for respect or the want for safety or the want for something else that makes me react that way. Okay. So sometimes people have this idea that if I start doing shadow work, I'm going to unleash that, and I am actually going to go around and start punching people in the nose. And nothing could be farther from the truth. When you start doing shadow work, you become less reactive. It's not to say those thoughts might not still come up, but they'll tend to come up less, first of all. There'll be less emotional energy attached to them, like, oh, that guy's kind of a jerk, I'd like to punch him in the nose. But it's not this like raging, seething, hot under the collar anger. Okay, so we can start to do some transmutation. This is really an alchemical process. And as we start to work with these shadow parts, we get more choices about how we want to behave and react to things. And that's a good thing. We also unlock a lot of energy, and we also unlock a lot of understanding about ourselves. Self-knowledge is incredibly important in any sort of personal or spiritual development. So let me talk a little bit about the shadow work I have done, and this is where shamanism comes into place. Now, my teacher has invented a whole body, adapted a whole body of shamanic work around doing shadow work, and it's relatively complicated and requires that you actually do it with a teacher in person at least the first time you do this work. But this work has so profoundly changed my life that I go back to it at least a couple times a year since I've learned it, 8 years ago or something along those lines, a long time ago. And I'll tell you about how this work has changed my life? Well, one thing is I came into shamanism as a result of personal crisis. I'd been diagnosed with PTSD. I was experiencing extreme depression, anxiety. I was having panic attacks. I was having a hard time eating. I lost something like 60 pounds. I wasn't sleeping, all of these things. And I was trying all kinds of stuff to try to get well. And I got this very clear message from Spirit to go learn shamanism. And I found my teacher. I was lucky to find my teacher near where I lived. And I have spent years and years training with her. And she is retired, I'm sorry to say, from teaching. So you can't go study with her. You could come study with me, but you can't go study with her. She's retired at this point. But, when I got the PTSD diagnosis, they were telling me there is no cure for this. There's no cure. All you can do is hope to manage your symptoms. That doesn't sound very positive. I've done a lot of work, and I primarily live symptom-free and have for years. I can't say that I cured myself because, I don't know, that would break some rule somewhere. But this is about as close to a cure as I can expect. I am drug-free. I've not taken medication. I have done talk therapy, and I continue to do that, and I love talk therapy, and I think everybody can do talk therapy. I think everybody can benefit from shamanic healing. So I highly recommend those. But one of the most transformative pieces that I've done that I keep going back to, particularly if I'm going through some stuff, is this shadow work. Now, you don't have to do shadow work shamanically. There's lots of different ways to do shadow work. And I've actually developed a course in shadow work, and I'll put an online course in video, and I'll put a link to it in the description below, and you can go do shadow work that way, which is not the shamanic method. The shamanic method requires some training. You have to know how to journey. You have to have helping spirits. You have to have certain experiences that you can pull upon to do that work. But it is incredibly powerful. Every time I do it, it is very transformative. And if I'm ever feeling like my life is out of control, which happens from time to time, stuff happens, getting divorced, kids growing up, and my kids have just started to drive, and I'm doing okay, but my kids have just started to drive, and that it kind of it's a stage in life. I'm very proud of them, but it's also a stressful time too, because I worry about them. I worry about their safety, and they're excited to be driving and all of these things, and I'm excited for them. But it is a change. It's a transition. So stuff can come up that's very stressful in life, and if I feel like things are kind of coming apart a little bit, I'll go back and do shadow work. I don't think that'll ever be done. I don't think that anybody is ever done. People talk about enlightenment, etc., as something to achieve, like a level. Like, I reached level 3 in this video game. And I know there are systems out there that have levels of enlightenment, right? All the different samadhis and what have you. I can't speak with a great deal of expertise about that, other than I will say there are, and this is another reason why shadow work is incredibly important, there are lots and lots of spiritual teachers who have been considered either enlightened or very close to it, very wise teachers who maybe even have developed some siddhis or spiritual abilities, and turns out they wind up doing things like sexually abusing their followers, or financially abusing their followers, or drinking themselves to death, or committing suicide, or all of those things. In fact, I had a teacher many years ago who wound up committing suicide, and he was considered enlightened by many of his students. So what's going on there? So I really like the work of Ken Wilbur, who wrote books about integral spirituality, and I guess the best way to describe Ken Wilbur is as a philosopher. He's written in he's a very prolific writer and written in a lot of areas, and his stuff is really smart. It's really intellectual. It's really up in the brain a whole lot, and I identify with that. So if you like that stuff, I recommend his work. And he talks about spiritual development on different different axes, and one of those is waking up, right? Waking up, and that is the sort of the enlightenment, the recognition that we are all one spirit underneath. We're all connected. There's no separation. The unity of everything. That's the awakening, waking up part. And then there's the growing up part, and that involves sort of ethical, moral development. Like I grow up, I start to see myself as part of the community of man, and I want to, I want everybody else to be enlightened and happy and joyous as well. And then there's cleaning up, and this is the shadow work aspect. So a lot of people do the waking up stuff and forget about the cleaning up stuff, and forget about the growing up stuff as well. And then the other component that he's kind of tacked on is showing up, right? It's like, after I've gone through all this, how do I show up in the world to try to make the world a better place for everybody else? So many people focus on the waking up aspect as if it is the only component of spiritual experience, and it isn't. And in fact, I don't think you can be fully awakened without doing the shadow work either. Personally, I don't think I'll ever be done doing the shadow work. I don't think the shadow is so deep and so rich, and it's been developed at least since we were born, and maybe before that. So there's so much material there, I don't feel like I'm ever going to get to the bottom of it. And that's fine. It's all about making progress, right? Again, a lot of people have this thing where I'm trying to reach some level of achievement. I'm trying to reach this level of, I'm 100% clear of shadow material. And I think that's unrealistic, and I think that leads to a lot of spiritual bypassing, which is when we, use our spirituality to ignore part. It's another part of pushing things into the shadow. It's like, I am so spiritually developed that I no longer feel anger. That's a load. I don't know anybody for whom that is true, and have never met anybody for whom that is true. So one thing I'll say is that I was giving a talk a few years back, and two young women showed up to this talk. It was a talk on spirituality, and they were both they let me know they were both in recovery. They were in an outpatient recovery program for some kind of addiction, and as part of their treatment, they had taken up meditation, and were doing some yoga and maybe some other spiritual practices to sort of manage stress and that sort of thing. And one of the women said to me, on my way over here, somebody cut me off in traffic, and I got really angry. And then I noticed that I was really angry, and then I got really angry that I was angry, because I'm not supposed to be angry, because I've been meditating for a month or something along those lines. And we had a talk about that brought up some things, and along with the silliness of being angry about being angry, I asked, then did you get angry that you were angry that you were angry? And how much anger do you want to stack on top of that? But this is where we start to push things into our shadow. When we say, I shouldn't get angry because I meditate. It shouldn't happen. So I'm going to ignore that. And so I push it. So that stuff actually builds up, and it'll come out at some point. It'll pop up. It's like if you've ever taken a rubber ball and pushed it underwater, it'll come up somewhere. It'll pop up somewhere. And that's the same thing with your shadow material. It pops up somewhere. It never stays 100% hidden. But when we don't work with it, it shows up in ways that we don't expect. So anyway, that is shadow work, a little bit about shadow work and shamanism. I will post a link to my new shadow work course in the description here. I hope that you will check it out and get some value out of it. And I will talk to you very soon. I hope you're happy and healthy.